Okay, part two, A Man Among the Gentiles. Continuing on from the last post regarding some of the observations and speculations made in the series regarding the man among the Gentiles, I agree that the man among the Gentiles prophecy is very significant and worth pondering and researching for better understanding. I believe Nephi mentioned this man among the Gentiles in the Book of Mormon for an important reason. I think our understanding of prophecy will be enhanced if we know who the man is and when he came across the many waters to the seat of Lehi. I believe it's possible to know who the man is and why the Lord inspired Nephi to include him in the prophecies. Christopher Columbus is usually considered to be the man that Nephi saw in vision among the Latter day Saints. However, I agree with the author. Christopher Columbus does have a very disturbing history, and he never set foot in North America. He simply does not fit the prophetic narrative, and it's very unlikely that he is the man that Nephi saw in vision. The author suggests that it may be very helpful to understand who Nephi saw if we want to understand the timing of events in the prophecies contained in 1 Nephi 13 and 14. The man in vision possibly does represent a prophetic signpost to know where to start counting the 400-year prophetic timeline associated with the narrative. He suggests that the starting point is when the man among the Gentiles emerges. He claims that the 400-year period ends with the time of destruction, as related in the 1 Nephi 13 through 14 narrative. I find his speculation to be intriguing and possible, if not probable. The reason I find this timeline scenario intriguing is that it just happens to match a 400-year prophecy in the Old Testament that we shall consider in this post. While I agree with some of the primary observations and speculations of the author, I disagree that Roger Williams is the man Nephi saw among the Gentiles. In my opinion, Roger Williams cannot possibly be the man that Nephi saw in vision. He simply does not meet the prophetic chronological criteria set forth in the prophecy. It's odd that the author states that he does not want to debate the likelihood of his candidate, Roger Williams, when in fact he is basing much of his entire premise on Roger Williams and the related year of the 1630 when Williams emerged as being the starting point of the prophecy. The author states, quote, I realize there are many theories as to the identity of the man shown to Nephi and that cases can be made for each candidate. I'm not interested in arguing the relative merits of the various candidates. In this introduction to Roger Williams, I have made the case that he could be the man. He's not necessary to the story. He was put there so we could ask questions. End of quote. The problem with this curious stance, if not being interested in arguing the merits of the various candidates, is that his timeline he proposes only holds water if he can document the starting point by identifying the man among the Gentiles. He's identified the year 1630 as the starting point of the prophecy, and he's identified the emergence Roger Williams in America in that year. He provides Williams' emergence as the proof that 1630 is the starting point. Hence, Roger Williams becomes integral to his hypothesis. Shortly after stating that Williams is not necessary to the storyline, the author makes the following statement, quote, using Roger Williams' flight from England as the starting point yields a match to our history and a dire warning to the latter-day Gentiles, as well as to the covenant people. Time is short. End of quote. And then, quote, Roger Williams, the man among the Gentiles, was the beginning. He laid the foundation that supported the structure for nearly 400 years. But true to the Nephite pattern, it has been destroyed in the expected time period. All that remains is the sweeping off soon to come. We may yet have a few years of relative stability in which to build a temple, but even that is the terrible jeopardy in this moment. God help us. End of quote. Perhaps the most astounding claim made by the author in his attempt to sensationalize the life of Roger Williams is to make the following declaration, quote, the First Amendment to the U.S. Constitution is the direct result of the thoughts, ideas, and sacrifices of Roger Williams. I think it no exaggeration to call Roger Williams the founder of our nation. Seriously. End of quote. Actually, It feels like somewhat of an exaggeration to me. The author seems to want to have his cake and eat it too. He spends part of his time showing the importance of Roger Williams in the year 1630, and part of the time saying that Roger Williams is not hugely important to this story. Which is it? As mentioned in the previous post, it appears that the author simply backtracked 400 years from the year 2030, and the author feels it is an important prophetic milepost of destruction because of the published globalist agenda. Once he arrived at the year 1630, he simply looked for the most high-profile Christian that emerged in that year. Having pinpointed the beginning point of the prophetic timeline, Roger Williams seemed to be the most qualified individual, so the author picked him to base the 400-year timeline around, and possibly embellished the role he played in the establishment of this nation. There's nothing wrong with backtracking from an end date to come up with the starting date of a prophecy, and then looking to see if a major event and/or person can validate the starting point. I do it all the time. The elephant in the room is this entertaining and speculative prophetic storyline, which is easy to forget about, is that Roger Williams simply came to America too late to be among the first to arrive in this country, per the requirements of the prophecy. He was clearly not among the first Gentiles to come across the many waters to the land of promise. He was late to that party. His brethren of the Mayflower Puritans arrived in America in 1620. Roger Williams did not arrive in the Promised Land until 1635, 15 years later. In my opinion, Roger Williams would have to have come over to America with the Mayflower Puritans, or at least very close to that period of time, in order to be seriously considered as the man that Nephi saw in vision. Nevertheless, I think the author is on to something about the possibility of a 400-year prophecy in the first Nephi 13 through 14 narrative. I suspect that it matches the 400-year prophecy from the Old Testament that I've blogged about from time to time in the years. Let us review the prophecy of the Old Testament. 400-year prophecy of Abraham. In the 15th chapter of Genesis, our father Abraham was placed in a trance and shown that his children would be strangers in a land where they would serve a foreign power and be afflicted for 400 years. Quote, "And when the sun was going down, a deep sleep fell upon Abram, and lo, and horror of great darkness fell upon him. And he said unto Abram, Know of a surety that the seed shall be a stranger in a land that is not theirs, and shall serve them, and they shall afflict them 400 years. And also that nation whom they shall serve will I judge, and afterward shall they come out with great substance. But in the fourth generation they shall come hither again, for the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet full." End of quote. That's in Genesis 15:12 through 16. Although this prophecy is usually characterized by Bible scholars as referring to the time that ancient Israel was in bondage, that historical event was only a type and shadow of the literal event that would take place at a later time. The actual time of ancient Israel's bondage was 430 years, not 400. From that, it's obvious that ancient Israel was only a shadow fulfillment of the prophecy. I believe the literal fulfillment of the above prophecy has reference to latter-day Israel and the founding of a Gentile nation on the Promised Land by the Christian Gentiles from England. Abraham was shown that his posterity would come to a new land and that they would be a stranger in it. After arriving in that land, they would be afflicted for 400 years. The cryptic wording of the prophecy also means 4 generations, which is a term and time frame that the Lord uses several times in modern revelation. According to the revelations Joseph Smith received, it is after 4 generations that the Lord chastises those that hate him. I believe the saints of the restoration are the latter-day Israelites, and we are the strangers in this land. We are paying taxes to and serving and being afflicted by a secret foreign power, even a secret combination. True believers in Christ in America have been in bondage for 400 years, ever since they first came to this country. The prophecy informs us that at the end of 400 years, God judges the nation. I believe this matches the prophetic sequence in 1 Nephi 13 through 14, which begins with the man among the Gentiles playing a significant role in providing a starting point, one that leads to the eventual wrath of God and destruction falling upon the great and abominable church. The prophecy of Abraham possibly provides a second witness to a 400-year timeline given in the Book of Mormon. It enables us to place a designated period of time upon the prophetic narrative in Nephi's vision. I believe we have come to the end of the 400 years, and I believe our nation is now under God's judgment. It's my belief that the timing of the man Nephi saw coming across the many waters most likely takes place either in 1607 with the arrival of Pastor John Hunt, or 1620 with the arrival of the Mayflower Puritans and men such as John Carver, William Brewster, and William Bradford. Those are the two prominent years when Christian Gentiles arrived in America and did profound things relating to the establishment of Christianity in the New World. Over the years, I've mentioned those two events as possibilities that might be interrelated to the 400-year prophecy of Abraham. Each of them lead to major catastrophic events in the history of our nation. In my opinion, it was the arrival of the Puritans on the Mayflower that played the most prominent role in the prophecy about the Gentiles given in 1 Nephi 13. Adding 400 years to that date takes us to the beginning of the global conspiratorial genocide that we are currently witnessing. Interestingly, these Puritans were of the same religious tradition, fervor, and integrity as Roger Williams. If my speculation is correct, the timing of the recent the kill shot associated with it that began in 2020 represents the ending point of the 400-year prophecy and the beginning of judgment in this nation. Then he's got a graphic here stating and showing what he just said. Okay, it would mean that we have just witnessed a major prophetic signpost beginning in about 2020. That would indicate that we have entered the beginning point of God's judgment upon the wicked of this nation. And that would mean that this nation is about to face much greater bondage than we've ever experienced before. That's the bad news. It might also mean that our deliverance is nigh at hand. That's the good news. In a future episode, I'll address those key dates and key figures a little more, but please remember, I'm not necessarily stating that the man Nephi saw was one of the Gentiles associated with those two time periods. There's actually another prominent player from that time period who's not a Gentile. The person I'm thinking of was from the seed of Lehi, who found himself separated from his brethren among the Gentiles. He crossed back over the many waters and becomes reunited with his American native brethren at the very period of time that the Mayflower reached a new world. On his return, he then plays an incredible role in facilitating the Christian Gentiles who are coming to the new world. My guess is that you have now figured out who I'm talking about. More on that in the next episode. But for now, I want to reiterate, if 1620 is the beginning point of the two prophecies, that would make the year 2020 the completion date and the beginning of judgment upon this nation. This would suggest that the global conspiracy to commit mass genocide, which began in 2020, is the prophetic event that results in destruction. We've been witnessing a remarkable event resulting in the systematic destruction of our free enterprise system, the healthcare system, and just about everything else in America and the world as a result of the mass genocide that has begun to take place. I believe we've been experiencing greater bondage in America associated with the wrath of God and destruction falling upon this nation. This would indicate that the amazing prophecy about the return of Joseph Smith leads us out of bondage, becoming hugely relevant at this time. We need to be led out of bondage. In section 101, the Lord provides the parable of the redemption of Zion, in which he explains how Zion will be redeemed. The Lord resumes talking about the prophecy in section 103. One of the grand promises in section 103 is that the time would come when Joseph Smith, accompanied by the Lord himself, would return to lead us, the latter-day children of Israel, out of bondage. Quote, starting in verse 17, "For ye are the children of Israel, and of the seed of Abraham, and ye must needs be led out of bondage by power, and with a stretched out arm. End of quote. Quote, verse 18, and as your fathers were led at the first, even so shall the redemption of Zion be. Therefore let not your hearts faint. For I say not unto you, as I said unto your fathers, mine angel shall go up before you, but not my presence. But I say unto you, mine angel shall go up before you, and also my presence. And in time ye shall possess the goodly land. Verily, verily, I say unto you that my servant Joseph Smith Jr. is the man, whom I likened the servant to whom the Lord of the vineyard spake in the parable which I have given unto you. And in parentheses, speaking of the parable of the redemption of Zion in section 101, end of parentheses. Now in verse 22, therefore let my servant Joseph Smith Jr. say unto the strength of my house, my young men and middle-aged, gather yourselves together unto the land of Zion, upon the land which I have bought with money that has been consecrated unto me. And let all the churches send up wise men with their monies, and purchase lands even as I have commanded them. And inasmuch as mine enemies come against you to drive you from my goodly land, which I have consecrated to be the land of Zion, even from your own lands after these testimonies, which you have brought before me against them, ye shall curse them. And whomsoever ye curse, I will curse, and ye shall avenge me of mine enemies. And my presence shall be with you, even in avenging me of mine enemies, unto the third and fourth generation of them that hate me. End of quote. If we have reached the end of the 400-year period of bondage, and if this nation is currently being judged by God, the time for the return of Joseph Smith and our Lord is near. Are you ready, or are you going to seek refuge from false prophets? The return of God's deliverer is imminent. It's been prophesied about since ancient times. Quote, there shall come out of Zion the deliverer, and shall turn away ungodliness from Jacob. End of quote. That's in Romans 11:26. The above passage from Paul in the New Testament is a rephrasing of the following passage from Isaiah in the Old Testament. Quote, starting in verse 19. So shall they fear the name of the Lord from the west, and his glory from the rising of the sun. When the enemy shall come in like a flood, the Spirit of the Lord shall lift up a standard against him. And the Redeemer shall come to Zion, and unto them that turn from transgression in Jacob, saith the Lord. Notice that the deliverer, Redeemer, comes forth right at the time when the enemy is coming into the land like a flood. If you don't think the enemy is currently coming into our land, you must be watching the mainstream media, which is controlled by the global conspirators. The enemy has been flowing in for some time, and the numbers keep increasing, but a huge surge is about to take place. Liberty. Once again, most Mormons and Christians are completely oblivious to the fact that America has never totally been a land of real liberty in the ultimate sense that's spoken of in 1 Nephi 13. The land of liberty mentioned in 1 Nephi 13 is referring to the eventual establishment of Zion. Prior to the upcoming establishment of Zion, America has actually been a land of bondage, masquerading as a land of freedom. Secretly, it's been controlled by nefarious powers in the secret chamber. America has been disguised and promoted as a land of freedom. The term hidden darkness in the Book of Mormon might be an appropriate descriptive to refer to the bizarre situation we find ourselves in. Starting in verse 5, this is 2 Nephi chapter 3. Quote, wherefore Joseph truly saw our day, and he obtained a promise of the Lord, that out of the fruit of his loins the Lord God would raise up a righteous branch unto the house of Israel, not the Messiah, but a branch which was to be broken off, nevertheless to be remembered in the covenants of the Lord, that the Messiah should be made manifest unto them in the latter days, in the spirit of power, unto the bringing of them out of darkness unto light, yea, out of hidden darkness, and out of captivity unto freedom. End of quote. Study the above passage. Clearly, we are living in the latter days. Is there anyone reading this blog post that actually believes that the Messiah has been manifest to us in the spirit of power, resulting in bringing us out of darkness into light? Are any of you deluded enough to think that we have been brought out of hidden darkness and out of captivity unto freedom? The term hidden darkness perfectly describes Mormons that walk around holding the Book of Mormon and Doctrine and Covenants, both of which clearly document and testify against the darkness and apostasy they're living in. Yet they proudly proclaim membership in the only true church and claiming that all is well in Zion. However, hidden darkness in the above passage has a broader political connotation as well. It's also an appropriate term to describe people who proudly put their hand over their heart and repeat the Pledge of Allegiance, thinking they live in a free country, while in fact they are in bondage to a foreign power. But I digress, which I've been known to do from time to time. Please notice on the graphic how the first Nephi 13 through 14 narrative begins with a man among the Gentiles going to the seat of Lehi in the Promised Land and ends with the wrath of God being poured out upon a wicked Gentile nation living in the Promised Land. It ends in destruction upon the wicked. Notice how Abraham sees God's people enter into a land not previously theirs, and after 400 years, judgment falls upon that nation. The cryptic wording of the trance that Abraham had suggested the significance of the last 4 generations of the 400-year period, which is the period of time from the rejection of the fullness of the gospel by the believing Gentiles to the time when the wrath of God begins to fall upon the wicked Gentile nation. Hence, God refers to the upcoming vengeance upon the 3rd and 4th generation of those who hate him multiple times in the revelations he gave to Joseph Smith, including sections 103 and 105. As in verse 30, quote, "And after these lands are purchased, I will hold the armies of Israel guiltless in taking possession of their own lands, which have been previously purchased with their moneys, and of throwing down the towers of mine enemies that may be upon them, and scattering their watchmen, and avenging me of mine enemies unto the 3rd and 4th generation of them that hate me." End of quote. I believe the man that Nephi saw in vision does indeed represent the beginning of a prophetic sequence that we're living in, and I think it's the same 400-year timeline shown to Father Abraham.